everybody, and welcome to day 6 of my beginner sewing course. Today we're going to be learning how to cut your fabric, so let's get into it. So, how to cut fabric. It might seem self-explanatory, but I promise it isn't. Accurate cutting equals accurate sewing. So if you cut your pieces wrong, the garment is not going to fit exactly as it should. You obviously need fabric shears or sewing scissors if you want to cut your fabric, because if you use paper scissors, it's just not going to cut. Which brings me to, you also need regular scissors to cut your actual paper, because you're going to be printing your pattern pieces on paper. Also, I feel like I don't have to say, but I'm just going to say it in case. Don't use your fabric scissors on paper. It's just going to dull the blade. Another tool that you can use for cutting is a rotary cutter. It looks just like a pizza cutter, but you don't use it on pizza. So why would you use a rotary cutter instead of a pair of scissors? Well, some people like it because it's usually faster and it can be more precise. If you do use the rotary cutter, you're going to need a cutting mat, because if you don't cut it on a cutting mat, you're just going to scratch whatever surface you're working on, and also it's going to dull the blade. You're also going to need some fabric weights to hold the fabric while you cut it, like a pizza. So I already told you this, but I'm gonna say it again. Before you cut your fabric, you need to put it in the washer/dryer because it might shrink. So it's better if it shrinks before, and also it might bleed. I made a dress and I didn't pre-wash it because I was lazy, and it stained my dress floor. You can see it there. It also stained my sewing machine and my table, so not fun. Another thing that you need to do before you start cutting is pressing the fabric so that there's no more wrinkles, because if you don't, if you put your pattern pieces on it, it might not be as accurate as it could be. And another thing that you should do if you're working with woven fabrics is you clip it, like let's say you clip it like 3 inches from the raw edge, so not the selvage, like the cross grain edge, right? 3 inches from there, just a little clip, and then you just rip it out. It's going to ensure that it's actually straight, like the edge is going to be straight, because if it was cut by someone at the store with a pair of scissors, it might not actually be like the true cross grain. Doing that is just going to make sure everything is straight. It's going to help you if you need to find the bias or the straight grain. It's a lifesaver, so I suggest doing that, but don't do that on knit fabrics or non-woven fabrics. Okay, now it's time to pin your pattern pieces to your fabric. I suggest pinning everything before you start cutting, so don't like pin a piece and then cut, you know, because that might waste a lot of fabric. So if you put all your pieces on your fabric first, you're gonna be able to find like the way that it wastes the least amount of fabric. Also, make sure that they're all facing the same direction, right? Look at the arrow and place them like that, parallel to the selvage. So while you're pinning your pieces, just make sure that everything lays as flat as possible. If there's bumps, or if you can tell that your pattern piece is like a little rounded and it's not fully laying flat on the fabric, it's not gonna work. Don't cut it if that happens. Just make sure it is fully flat. And you will probably work with some fabrics that are not good for pinning, because if you pin them, it'll leave a permanent hole in them, like faux leather, for example. In that case, I would use clips instead. If you're lazy, like me, when I made my faux leather dress for Halloween, I didn't want to buy clips because I was cheap, and I just pinned it within the seam allowance, so the holes are in the seam allowance, so no one can see them except for me. You might also need to fold your fabric if your pattern calls for a cut on the fold, and that's also where ripping it comes in handy, because you'll know that your fold is perfectly straight. So when you're cutting your fabric, let's say you're cutting it on the floor like I do, it will give you back problems, but whatever. I don't have a big enough table for it, so maybe one day. What was I saying? Oh yeah, when you're cutting the fabric, make sure it's all flat. So if you're cutting on a table, make sure it doesn't dangle off the table, because some fabrics will actually stretch if you do that. Like satin and silk, they will stretch. So that's why I like to do it on the floor or on a really big table. So when you're cutting with a pair of scissors, make sure that like you don't hold the fabric like that, you know, because that's not precise at all. you want to like make it lay flat and then cut like this, okay? Not like that, not like that, like this, as flat as possible. It's gonna ensure, can you even see? So when you're cutting with a pair of scissors, make sure you don't hold up the fabric as you cut it like that, because then it's not gonna be precise. You want to like make it lay flat, you know? Like your scissors have to basically touch the floor as you're cutting, and make big snips, okay? Like big snips, not little tiny snips. That's not gonna help. Once your pieces are all cut, don't unpin them yet. You're gonna transfer all the markings. So let's say there's a dart, notches, bust points, all of that, you're going to transfer on your fabric. You can use chalk or a water-soluble pen. When it comes to darts, I like to use my tracing wheel and trace over the dart. And then after that, like I take off the paper, and you'll see like all the little holes. So I just draw over that again with my chalk, so I can see the triangle really well. Oh yeah, if your fabric has a pattern on it, like this one, I keep showing you this one. It's just such a good example of a fabric. I haven't done anything with it yet, but I will. I love it so much, and I want it to be the perfect project, the perfect dress, of course. What was I saying again? Oh yeah, so if it has a pattern, cut it all in the same direction, which you should already be doing, but just take extra care when you're working with a pattern. If the pattern doesn't have a seam allowance on it, don't cut it. Add the seam allowance first. So take a clear ruler, like one of the ones I told you to buy at the beginning, and mark the seam allowance yourself. You can choose whatever you want. Like I always say, I use a 1/2 inch because, I don't know, it's good, it's fun, it's easy to math. Like if I want to do a French seam, the math is easy. I'll show you how to do a French seam later. Yeah, so just add the seam allowance before you cut. Okay, so let's say you were sewing a corset. Well, what you're gonna do is fold your fabric in half. Fold your fabric and place all your pieces on the folded fabric. And when it says cut 2 of one piece, you won't actually have to cut 2 because there's gonna be 2 layers already. So you take your scissor and you cut through both fabrics, both layers. And like that you have 2. It saves a lot of time. And it's more precise. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's it. What would your homework be? Let me think. Practice cutting straight, I guess. And like I said, make sure that when you cut, you cut straight and you don't hold your fabric up. That could be good homework. What else? Let me go over. Let me go over. Literally, I guess that's it. There's not much you can do in this video. Just, you know, try to remember it all. Yeah, try to remember it all. That's it. I will see you in day 7. Have a good one.